Hello. Today, the Education Secretary announced changes to next year's GCSEs and A-levels to boost fairness. All students in England will be told in advance some of the topics to expect on their exam questions and will receive higher grades for poorer performances. This, amongst other measures, is to mitigate the impact of the pandemic. But the reality is, COVID is hitting certain parts of the country harder than others. With 1 in 5 English secondary school pupils absent because of isolation, and Ofsted saying that schools in some areas have 40% of staff that are either self-isolating or have tested positive, the playing field is far from equal. And yet all pupils will be eligible for these special measures, but not all school children will have missed the same amount of school. At the moment, only England and Northern Ireland are planning to push ahead with all exams next summer. Other nations are using different means of assessment. So what can be done to ensure true fairness for all pupils taking exams in England next summer? Here's our policy editor, Lewis Goodall.
Who'd have thought that this, as mundane an act as a set of mock exams, would have become such a relief? The teachers at Beacon Hill Academy in Dudley are happy that they can go ahead, that right now there's enough staff and enough students to make it work. Because it could be a close-run thing. There is a quiet crisis unfolding across many schools, especially in the North and Midlands, the COVID hotspots, where the schools might now be open, but the students and the staff can't always come.
Incredibly challenging. I've been at the school for 15 years and I've never experienced the level of challenge and difficulties. Also, just last week we had 29 teaching staff that had to go into isolation, not necessarily because they themselves had COVID, but because they've come into contact with someone that actually has. So at the moment we've got Year 7 and Year 8 that are self-isolating.
2 whole year groups at the moment are off.
That's right, yes. Luckily this week we have not had any confirmed cases. But as soon as we do, we immediately have a robust track and trace system, and that can take anything from 30 to 60 students out.
Since the start of term across England, school attendance has fluctuated. For much of the early part of the autumn, it hovered at or around 90%. But recent weeks have seen a decline to the early 80s. Last week, the figure was 83%. When you dig down further, though, it looks worse. For secondary schools, the figure for last week in England was 78%. So more than 1 in 5 secondary school English pupils weren't at school, largely as a result of COVID. 68% of secondaries have at least one pupil isolating, and the average secondary school has at least half a year group off for COVID. And remember, these are just averages. In Tier 3 areas like Dudley, the number of absences are generally higher. Newsnight has spoken to heads with half of their pupils in isolation. The challenges posed for education are profound.
If you need help in a lesson at school, you can just put your hand up, ask the teacher, but at home you can't really do that.
People I knew didn't have the same apps or the right technology to use at home, so they were struggling to complete their work, and as we were moving forward in our lessons, they were slowly falling behind.
It's a bit harder at home because you have like TV, phone.
It's really difficult to be in school because we never know when the last time we're going to see everyone is. Like on a Friday, when we're walking home, we hug everyone because we don't know whether that's going to be the last time we see them for 2 more weeks.
So, the first one we're going to focus on then, folks, is the leaflets.
Schools like Beacon Hill have done all they can to make things easier, but they're having to teach to pupils at home and in school simultaneously. Often teachers are having to teach subjects outside their field, while sometimes needing to isolate because their own children at different schools have been isolated. And they can't know how much time each student will be forced to be at home and plan accordingly. Chanel is about to finish her 2nd week of isolation.
Do you find it easier or harder to sort of concentrate at home than at school?
You don't have no teachers nagging at you.
Well, that's a plus. Do you miss being at school?
Yeah, I do miss seeing all my friends and the teachers. Yeah, I do.
Remember, this is a cohort which has already lost months of education at the start of this year, yet they're due to be examined as usual next summer. Today, Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, announced a set of easements, more generous grade boundaries and study aids in exams to help this year's GCSE and A-level students.
The problem with the easements that Gavin Williamson has suggested is that they don't address the issue of equity. Students in places like Dudley are being forced to self-isolate more frequently, are being forced to be taught from home more frequently, their teachers are being forced to self-isolate more frequently, and if, come the next exam season, Places like Dudley and the places which have been most hit by COVID do significantly worse than places which haven't, then this will be the reason why, and we could see another exams imbroglio all over again.
The government and Ofqual really need to take into account the regional differences and the regional impact of the attendance and the lost time that some of our learners will have had.
The Department for Education says they're considering how to address these regional inequalities. There are no easy answers, but if they don't find them, the danger is that the inequalities which already exist between schools are compounded yet further. And while the rest of us are vaccinated and have moved on, these kids are living with the consequences.